Hi friends, welcome back to the channel. I'm Filip, a medical doctor and PhD student here in Croatia, and on this channel you can join me on my journey through medicine and science. So basically, for the past couple of videos in this series, I've been reading the research papers from two British researchers called Dahl and Hill, which were in the 1950s and a bit sooner than that, trying to figure out why there was a large increase in deaths due to lung cancer. At the time, there were sort of two main suspects. One was general atmospheric pollution from exhaust fumes, factories, etc., and the other suspect was smoking. The things we know today about smoking and lung cancer and other diseases as well mostly stems from the research that these researchers did, so Dahl and Hill. They conducted a long-term research, so something which was really novel at the time, that they took around 24,000 participants and followed them for years and years to see which ones would develop lung cancer and which ones wouldn't. So I talked about the first report published from this research in the previous video, so now I'll cover basically their second report, which took place after 4.5 years of following these 24,000 participants. Now, after 4.5 years, around 1,700 people had died from those 24,000 which were in the study, and out of those 1,700 and something, 86 of them died due to lung cancer, which is a considerable increase in the number of cases compared to their first report when only 36 patients had died from lung cancer. So with larger numbers comes usually greater certainty, or larger certainty in the evidence and in the association which can be found between, in this case, smoking and lung cancer. Now, they chose doctors as their participants, so all of those 24,000 and something participants in the study were actually UK doctors, hence the title Why Doctors Smoke for this series. And basically they only looked at men older than 35, because men younger than 35 and women in all age groups really smoked very, very rarely at the time. So there was no sense in picking those few numbers and comparing them to much larger numbers in this population of men older than 35. Similarly to their first report, they again found that the increase in the number of deaths due to lung cancer tended to go with the increase in the amount of tobacco smoked. In other words, people who smoked more tobacco were more likely to get lung cancer and subsequently die from it. This difference between, say, non-smokers and heavy smokers was 20-fold. So heavy smokers were 20 times more likely, or the number of deaths due to lung cancer was 20 times greater in the heavy smoker population than in the non-smoker population. Now, this is a trend which is sort of identical to the one from the first report, and in fact the same trend was observed for each year of follow-up. So for those 4.5 years, during the first, second, third, fourth year, every time the trend was the same. Number of deaths due to lung cancer increases as the amount of tobacco smoked increases. This sort of persisting trend indicates that it wasn't an accidental finding. It didn't happen simply due to chance or because they got lucky or selected sort of a special subset of patients, but rather it seems that this was something which persisted, which stood the test of time, and which is probably significant in a way. Another thing is that we would sort of expect that if we followed a group of people for 4 years, that older people, for instance, older than 75, would probably be more likely to die within those 4 years than younger people. So we sort of have to adjust and take that into consideration as well. And in fact, this trend of high tobacco smoking leading to higher numbers of lung cancer persisted even throughout all the age groups. So for example, if one age group is 35 to 54, then 55 to 64, etc., all these age groups show the exact same thing, which would sort of also indicate that the finding of increased deaths due to lung cancer wasn't due to age, but rather due to smoking. except for lung cancer, they also had information on total number of deaths regardless of the cause. So it could be a heart attack or a different kind of cancer, etc. And they basically saw the same trend, that deaths increased in the patients who smoked and they were smaller in patients who didn't smoke. And they even went one step further in this report, and they examined what is the effect of quitting smoking. So they sort of divided those patients into 3 groups. One were current smokers, or smokers who smoked at the time this questionnaire was sent to them. Then they had ex-smokers who recently stopped smoking within the last 10 years. And then they had sort of long-term ex-smokers who stopped smoking more than 10 years ago. And what they saw, which seems obvious today, but it's obvious thanks to this research in large part, is that in ex-smokers who had stopped smoking a very long time ago, the number of deaths was much smaller than those who had stopped smoking recently, and that number was still a lot smaller than those who are currently smoking. In other words, quitting smoking, and especially the longer time you go sort of smoke-free, increases your survivability, or your chances of dying from lung cancer are smaller if you quit smoking, even if it's for less than 10 years, but especially so if it's more than 10 years. That's basically what they saw in their research. Now, another thing was, as I mentioned, there was another suspect for this increase in number of lung cancer deaths, and that was general atmospheric pollution. And some critics of Dahl and Hill's research, especially their earlier work, said that this connection between smoking and the increase in the number of deaths which they described in their research isn't actually due to smoking, but rather it has to do with where people live. So they claimed that people who had more or more often got lung cancer were people who lived in larger cities, where the general atmospheric pollution was greater and therefore caused the lung cancer, whereas people who lived in the countryside or in smaller villages weren't exposed to as much pollution, and that's why they had less lung cancer deaths, which is, a valid sort of point of view. So what Dahl and Hill did was they performed a sort of sub-analysis of their data by looking at people who lived in the same city. So out of those 24,000 people they had included, they had information on where they lived and worked, and they sort of limited, okay, let's look at this number of patients who all live in this city. And again, they saw the same trend, that when you look at only people who have the same sort of residence and the same exposure to general atmospheric pollution, that those who smoke more will more likely get lung cancer than those who don't. How do you like the series so far? Let me know in the comments. I hope it's not too boring. I know there's a lot of numbers and stuff, but yeah, let me know in the comments, and check out my video on mercury in vaccines, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. Thanks, and I'll see you later.